Rain hammered the cemetery as two armed men threw Isabella Moretti, a beautiful 400-pound mortician, into an empty grave. Above her stood Dante Romano, the Mafia Don she had secretly loved for 3 years, holding a death certificate bearing her signature. It proved that Isabella had falsified the records of his murdered brother and delivered the body to Dante's enemies. Before midnight, the grave would be filled and every trace of her betrayal buried with her. But when Dante demanded to know why she had sold him out, Isabella pointed to the date on the certificate. It had been signed 12 hours after she was already locked inside the Romano estate. Someone with access to her instruments had forged her work, and that person was still standing among Dante's most trusted men. As the first shovel of soil struck her dress, Isabella whispered that his brother's body had preserved one final secret. If Dante buried her, he would bury the only person who knew where it was hidden. Rain struck the Romano family cemetery hard enough to turn the paths into black rivers. Isabella Moretti's heels dragged through the mud as two men hauled her between the marble tombs. But she refused to lower her head. Her soaked black dress clung to her soft, full figure, and the silver buttons at her throat still shone beneath the floodlights at 34. Isabella had prepared the dead of Chicago's most feared family for 11 years. Tonight, that family intended to make her one of them. The empty grave waited beside the Romano mausoleum. Dante stood at its edge in a charcoal overcoat, motionless beneath the rain. He looked exactly as he had during every crisis Isabella had helped him survive. Controlled, severe, almost impossible to read. Only the death certificate crushed inside his fist betrayed him. "On your knees," ordered Matteo Vescari, Dante's security chief. Isabella remained standing. One of the guards struck the back of her leg. She dropped into the mud, but caught herself before her face hit the ground. A murmur passed through the 12 captains, gathered beneath black umbrellas. These were men who had once trusted her to close their fathers' eyes and carry their children's coffins. None of them stepped forward. Dante unfolded the certificate. "Nico Romano," he said. His younger brother's name sounded torn from somewhere deep inside him. "Pronounced dead at 11:42 Tuesday night. Embalmed under your authority. Transferred at 2:15 Wednesday morning." Isabella looked directly at him. "That is what the document says. It carries your signature and registration seal. It carries copies of them." Matteo handed Dante a tablet. Security footage showed Isabella wheeling Nico's covered body through the rear corridor of Moretti Funeral Home. A second recording showed the vehicle entering a warehouse controlled by the Bellaforte family. Bank records displayed a payment of $2 million routed into an account bearing Isabella's name. Dante turned the screen toward her. "Tell me which part is false." The conclusion. Something dangerous moved behind his eyes. For 3 years, Isabella had loved him quietly through the funerals, the midnight calls, and the rare moments when he let exhaustion soften his voice. She had believed that if the whole world condemned her, Dante would at least ask the right question. Instead, he was holding the shovel. The Bellafortes returned Nico's body this morning. Dante said his chest had been opened. Whatever he died protecting was gone. I opened his chest. Several captains reached beneath their coats. Dante's expression hardened. "You admit it?" "Yes, because someone had already altered his body before it reached my table." Matteo stepped closer. "A convenient story from a woman caught transferring the corpse herself." "The transfer footage is real," Isabella said. "The timestamp isn't T." Dante glanced toward the grave. "You have until midnight to tell me what you gave them." A church bell sounded beyond the cemetery wall. 11:30. 30 minutes. Isabella's pulse hammered, but fear could not erase what years of professional discipline had taught her. Observe first, act second. Matteo's shoes were clean despite the mud. One grave worker kept touching the radio beneath his coat. The concrete mixer waiting beyond the iron gates had arrived before Dante finished questioning her. This burial had been scheduled. "Read the authorization time," she said. Dante did not move. "Read it." His gaze dropped to the certificate. "Wednesday, 9:14 in the morning. I was locked inside your Lake Forest estate from Tuesday night until Wednesday evening. Your guards took my phone, my bag, and my seal case when the compound went into lockdown." A flicker of uncertainty crossed one captain's face. Matteo answered immediately. She could have prepared the document earlier. "No, Nico's identification number was issued at 6 Wednesday morning. I could not have signed a number that did not yet exist." Silence spread beneath the rain. Dante looked from the certificate to Matteo, but grief still outweighed doubt. "Where is the original evidence? Inside what remains of your brother? He was searched twice. By men looking for an object." Isabella leaned closer. Lowering her voice, "I preserved something no one without my training would recognize." The grave worker's hand closed around his hidden radio. Isabella saw it, so did Dante. She had only enough time to choose between exposing the secret and keeping Dante alive. "Put her in," Matteo ordered. The guards lifted her and threw her over the edge. Isabella struck the wet earth shoulder first, pain flashing down her arm. A shovel of soil scattered across her dress. Above her, Dante's face disappeared behind the rain. "If you bury me," she called, "the traitor standing beside you will destroy the proof before sunrise." Dante tightened his grip on the shovel. Then the grave worker whispered into his radio, "She knows." And somewhere beneath the Romano mausoleum, a steel door slammed shut. Dante's head snapped toward the mausoleum. "Who is below us?" he demanded. Matteo pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece. "Maintenance crew. They are securing the lower vault. At 11:30 at night, the storm triggered a water alarm." Isabella pushed herself upright, cradling her injured shoulder. Rainwater streamed down the earthen walls and pooled around her knees. The explanation sounded reasonable, but the steel door beneath the mausoleum could be opened only from the cemetery control room. Isabella knew because she had designed the vault's preservation system herself. Dante lifted one hand. The grave worker froze with his shovel raised. 3 minutes, Dante said. "Then she tells me where the evidence is, or we continue." 36 hours earlier, Isabella had been standing beneath the clean white lights of Moretti Funeral Home, unaware that her life was already being measured in minutes. She wore a fitted burgundy blouse beneath her black work coat, its tailored waist flattering rather than concealing her 400-pound figure. Her dark hair was pinned into a smooth knot, and pearl earrings glowed against her warm olive skin. The dead deserved dignity, and Isabella believed the person caring for them should arrive with dignity of her own. On the preparation table lay Carlo Bianchi, an 82-year-old Romano captain who had died peacefully after a long illness. His daughter had requested an open casket despite severe swelling caused by medication. 2 assistants had declared it impossible. Isabella studied Carlo's face, adjusted the angle of his neck, and selected a lower-pressure injection technique that would preserve his features without distorting them. She worked patiently for nearly 4 hours. By the time Carlo's daughter entered, her father looked like himself again. The woman touched his hand and began to cry. He hated looking tired. She whispered. "I know," Isabella said. "He told me at his wife's funeral that a Bianchi should never appear defeated." That small remembered detail mattered more to the daughter than all the technical skill Isabella had used. She embraced Isabella before leaving. Dante watched from the doorway. "You remember everything they tell you," he said. After the room emptied. "Only the things people are afraid everyone else will forget." His gaze lingered on her face, then slipped away. In another life, that silence might have become something tender. In this one, Dante Romano trusted Isabella with every secret his dead carried, yet rarely asked what burdens she carried home. He handed her a sealed black envelope. "Nico missed a council meeting this morning." Isabella removed her gloves. Your brother misses meetings whenever they require him to arrive before noon. He also missed lunch with our mother. That was different. Dante needed Isabella because the Moretti funeral home was more than a respected family business. It maintained the Romano organization as legitimate death records, transported bodies across state lines, and prevented enemies from turning private losses into public leverage. Isabella understood medical documentation, chain of custody, restorative work, and the quiet language of injuries. She had corrected mistakes made by doctors, lawyers, and men who carried guns for a living. Most of them never learned how often she protected them. The envelope contained Nico's emergency identification file and dental records. If he comes to you, Dante said, alive or otherwise, you call me directly, not Matteo, me. It was the closest Dante ever came to admitting that his security system had limits. Isabella locked the file inside the lower drawer of her desk. That drawer used an old mechanical key rather than an electronic code. Her father had installed it 20 years earlier, after telling her that every modern security system eventually answered to someone sitting at a keyboard. Shortly after midnight, a Romano vehicle arrived without warning. Matteo entered first, immaculate in a navy suit, followed by 2 guards carrying a sealed transport bag. He gave Isabella a provisional death order for Nico Romano and informed her that the estate was already in lockdown. Dante said, I should call him directly. Dante is with his mother. Then I'll wait. Matteo's expression remained courteous. You will begin now. Isabella examined the document. The authorization number field was blank, which was permitted during an emergency transfer. But the form carried Dante's embossed seal. Refusing would delay preservation and risk destroying evidence. She photographed the document, recorded the arrival time in her handwritten ledger, and broke the transport seal in front of both guards. Nico lay inside, wearing a blood-stained white shirt. The official report claimed he had died from a single wound beneath the ribs. Isabella found that wound immediately. She also found faint adhesive marks behind both ears, a fresh puncture inside his left arm, and preservative fluid already circulating beneath his skin. Someone had begun embalming him before he reached her. Who prepared this body? She asked. Matteo glanced at the guards. No one. Isabella pressed 2 fingers to Nico's neck, then lifted his right eyelid. A thin crimson line crossed the white of his eye, an indication inconsistent with the reported cause of death. She reached for her specimen kit. Matteo caught her wrist. Your job is to make him presentable. My job is to determine what can safely be done before I alter the evidence. For one long moment they faced each other across the body. Then the building alarm began to sound. Matteo released her. The estate has been breached. You're coming with us. I cannot leave him unsecured. You no longer have a choice. While the guards moved toward her, Isabella slipped the smallest tissue sample into a numbered preservation capsule. Instead of placing it in the electronic evidence refrigerator, she hid it inside the false back of her father's mechanical drawer. The alarm disabled every camera and unlocked every controlled door in the building. Every door except that drawer. The mechanical drawer remained locked after every electronic door in the funeral home opened. That was the only reason Isabella still possessed a piece of the truth. Matteo's guards took her to the Romano estate shortly after midnight. They confiscated her phone, handbag, keys, and professional seal case before locking her inside a second-floor guest room. The windows were reinforced, the room telephone had no signal, and 2 guards remained outside the door. No one told her whether Dante was alive. For 18 hours, Isabella replayed every detail she had observed on Nico's body. The adhesive behind his ears had likely held monitoring sensors. The puncture in his arm was too low for a routine intravenous line. Most troubling was the preservative already present beneath his skin. Embalming fluid did not circulate itself. Someone with professional equipment had handled him before he reached Moretti Funeral Home. At 6:15 Wednesday evening, the guards released her without explanation. Dante was not waiting downstairs. Matteo stood beside the front entrance, holding her possessions in a clear evidence bag. "The threat has been contained," he said. "Where is Nico in family custody?" "I began an examination. Moving him without completing the chain of custody report could compromise. Your services are no longer required." Isabella studied his face. "Did Dante say that?" Matteo smiled without warmth. "Mr. Romano has more urgent concerns than funeral arrangements." Her phone showed no missed calls because its history had been erased. Her photograph of Nico's provisional death order was gone. The direct number Dante had given her now produced a recorded message saying the line was unavailable. By the time Isabella returned to the funeral home, the building smelled of industrial disinfectant. Nico's body was gone, so were the transport bag, the provisional order, and the handwritten ledger she had left beside the preparation table. The security system claimed the alarm had been triggered by a defective smoke detector, but the diagnostic screen showed that an administrator had manually created the emergency 10 seconds before Matteo grabbed her wrist. Someone had needed the cameras disabled. Isabella locked the front doors and retrieved the mechanical key taped beneath her father's old desk. The numbered capsule remained behind the drawer's false panel. She prepared 3 slides from the tissue sample and examined them under polarized light. The first revealed chemical crystals from Moretti Funeral Home's standard arterial solution. That was expected. She had begun the initial procedure before the alarm. The second slide showed a different substance embedded deeper in the tissue. Isabella repeated the test, hoping she had contaminated it. The result did not change. Nico's cells contained traces of Lazarus A7, a specialized low-formaldehyde preservative used for long-term crypt maintenance. Only one facility in Illinois purchased it. The underground vault beneath the Romano mausoleum. She opened her private supplier records. 6 containers had been delivered to the cemetery 3 weeks earlier. Isabella had signed the purchase order, but Matteo's security office controlled the vault and maintained the inventory. The chemical proved Nico had been inside the Romano crypt before his body arrived at her funeral home. It also revealed something worse. Under higher magnification, Isabella found ruptured capillaries surrounding the preservative deposits. Blood had still been circulating when Lazarus A7 entered his body. Nico had not been embalmed after his death. The injection had helped cause it. Isabella stepped away from the microscope, fighting nausea. Death had never frightened her. The deliberate corruption of her profession did. She copied the test results onto paper rather than saving them to the network. Her father's old rule returned to her: if a system can report your actions, it can report them to the wrong person. She tried Dante's estate through the funeral home's landline. The call connected, but a security operator answered. "This is Isabella Moretti. I need to speak with Dante regarding Nico's preparation." "Mr. Romano is unavailable. Tell him Lazarus A7 was administered before death." A pause followed. "Repeat that." Isabella hung up. A legitimate operator would have asked what Lazarus A7 meant. Whoever answered already understood its importance. She took the sample, her paper notes, and the mechanical key. Before leaving, she placed a strand of black thread across the drawer seam. If anyone opened it, she would know. The Romano cemetery was closed when she arrived, but her professional credentials still unlocked the service entrance. Dante had never revoked her independent access because Isabella maintained every body inside the family vault. She left her phone in the car to prevent the security system from tracking it and entered through the chapel. The mausoleum's upper chamber was empty. Behind the altar, a concealed elevator descended to the climate-controlled lower vault. The steel door opened onto rows of stone burial compartments, stainless steel preparation equipment, and 6 blue containers of Lazarus A7. One container was missing its inventory seal. Nico lay on a mobile table beneath a white sheet. Isabella locked the door behind her and began a focused examination. His chest incision had been crudely resealed. Beneath it, she found a narrow internal pocket stitched into old surgical mesh left from a childhood operation. The pocket was empty, but a rectangular pressure mark remained in the surrounding tissue. Nico had hidden something inside his own body while he was alive. Whoever killed him had searched for it and failed. Isabella collected tissue from around the pocket, sealed it in a second capsule, and used preservative wax to protect the microscopic residue pressed into the mesh. Under ultraviolet light, that residue formed fragments of tiny printed numbers. Not medical data, account routing numbers. A warning tone sounded above the door. Someone in the cemetery control room had detected her entry and overridden the lock. Isabella had perhaps 4 minutes before security reached the vault. She could not leave Nico there. Whoever controlled the crypt had killed him once and was now returning to destroy what remained of his evidence. She pulled the transport sheet around his body and pushed the table toward the service lift. The Romano funeral van was still parked behind the chapel, and the Bellafortes operated the only independent refrigerated warehouse beyond Matteo's authority. Taking Nico there would look like betrayal. Leaving him would guarantee the truth disappeared. As the elevator began to rise, Isabella placed the preserved tissue capsule inside the hollow handle of her embalming instrument case. Then she called a Bellaforte number she had sworn never to use. "I have Nico Romano's body," she said. "Open the warehouse." "I have Nico Romano's body," Isabella said. "Open the warehouse." Lucia Bellaforte did not ask why. Her family had used Moretti Funeral Home for 2 generations. And 6 years earlier, Isabella had protected Lucia's murdered daughter from being photographed by reporters. The debt had never been discussed, but neither woman had forgotten it. "South entrance," Lucia replied. 15 minutes, Isabella ended the call and drove Nico's body out of the cemetery in the Romano funeral van. She obeyed every traffic signal and kept the speed below the limit. If Matteo controlled the cemetery cameras, he would already know which direction she had taken. Being stopped by police while transporting an undocumented body would end any chance of reaching Dante. The Bellaforte warehouse stood beside the Calumet River, hidden behind a legitimate frozen food company. Lucia met Isabella inside the refrigerated loading bay with 2 guards and a medical examiner named Dr. Aaron Pike. "No weapons near the body, Isabella," said. Lucia's eyebrow lifted. "You bring a dead Romano into my building and give me rules?" "I brought him here because your generators are independent. Your cameras store locally, and Matteo Vescari cannot erase either one." That answer earned a nod. They transferred Nico onto a stainless steel table. Isabella showed Doc Pike the ruptured capillaries and the chemical deposits around the original injection site. He tested the tissue himself, using unopened materials from Lucia's emergency medical cabinet. "Lazarus A7, he confirmed, introduced while circulation was active." Lucia folded her arms. "Someone embalmed him alive?" "Not fully. They injected enough to induce cardiac failure and confuse the post-mortem chemistry." "Can you prove where it happened?" "The product lot can be matched to the Romano crypt inventory." Isabella opened her instrument case and removed the second capsule from its hollow handle. Under Pike's ultraviolet scope, the residue from Nico's old surgical mesh revealed incomplete strings of routing numbers. Lucia recognized the first sequence. "That belongs to a maritime holding company," she said. "Romano Atlantic Logistics." Nico had discovered something connected to Dante's legitimate shipping empire and concealed a physical record inside his own body. The actual object was missing, but its microscopic imprint remained. Isabella prepared duplicate slides. One went into Pike's evidence safe. She sealed another inside a specimen envelope and handed it to Lucia. "If I don't contact you by tomorrow morning, deliver this directly to Dante. Not his estate, not his security office. Put it in his hand." Headlights flooded the loading bay. 3 black Romano vehicles blocked the south entrance. 2 more appeared on the warehouse cameras at the north gate. Lucia reached beneath her coat. "No," Isabella said. "If you fight, Matteo gets the war he needs." Dante entered surrounded by armed men. He looked first at Nico's body, then at Isabella. Whatever private feeling had once lived in his eyes disappeared behind a coldness that frightened her more than anger. "You were told to call me," she said. "You called Belafort. Your line was disabled." Matteo entered behind him carrying her professional seal case, the same one confiscated at the estate. "Found in Miss Moretti's office," he said. "That is not where I left it," Isabella replied. He opened the case. Inside were $2 million in bearer bonds and a signed transfer order granting the Belaforts control of 3 Romano shipping terminals. Isabella's name appeared beneath Dante's forged authorization. Matteo then displayed the funeral home footage. It showed Isabella removing Nico from the crypt, loading him into the van, and driving to enemy territory. The video was genuine. She had done every one of those things. Finally, he produced her handwritten ledger. The last entry stated that Nico's body had been released to a Bellaforte representative at 2:15 Wednesday morning. Beside it was Isabella's signature. "I did not write that entry. The handwriting examiner says otherwise," Matteo replied. Isabella looked at Dante. The official identification number did not exist at 2:15. "Check when it was issued." "I did." His voice was quiet. "The county database now shows 5 minutes past midnight. The record had been changed." Matteo had not merely invented evidence. He had rebuilt the timeline around actions Isabella truly performed. "Ask Dr. Pike what he found," she said. Dante turned toward the examination table. Pike was gone. A side door stood open, and the evidence safe beside it had been emptied. Lucia's guard reported that Pike's car had left less than a minute before the Romano vehicles arrived. Isabella stared at the abandoned microscope. She had trusted an examiner. Lucia trusted. But trust was not the same as control. Dante's grief hardened into certainty. "Bring my brother home," he ordered. "Take her too." The journey from the warehouse to the cemetery passed in silence. Isabella was restrained in the rear vehicle while Matteo circulated the death certificate, bank records, transfer order, and security footage among Dante's captains. By the time they reached the grave, her guilt had become the only story holding the organization together. Now rain poured into the empty grave as Dante's 3-minute deadline expired. "Where is the evidence?" he asked. "If I tell you in front of them, it will be destroyed." "Still protecting the Bellafortis?" "I am protecting you." The words struck something beneath his control, but it was not enough. Dante lowered the shovel. "Seal the grave at midnight." Matteo gave the order to continue. Soil fell around Isabella as the church bell began its first stroke. Then every light in the cemetery went black. Hands broke through a concealed opening in the grave wall and seized Isabella from behind. A cloth covered her mouth before she could call Dante's name. She was dragged through a narrow maintenance passage while gunfire erupted above. When emergency lights flickered on, Dante looked down. The grave was empty. Minutes later, Isabella regained consciousness on the floor of a moving utility van. Her wrists were bound. Her injured shoulder burned, and a masked man sat across from her, holding her mechanical drawer key. He did not mention the Bellaforts. He placed the key against her cheek and said, "You should have left Nico's body untouched." The masked man expected Isabella to beg. Instead, she studied the van. Its refrigerated walls carried shallow scratches from transport frames. A chemical odor clung to the floor, not bleach, gasoline, or ordinary disinfectant, but the sweet medicinal trace of Lazarus A7. The vehicle had transported preservative from the Romano crypt. Isabella shifted her bound hands and tested her injured shoulder. The joint moved, but lifting her arm sent pain into her neck. Bruised, not dislocated. She could work with pain. She could not work with a useless arm. "Where is the capsule?" the masked man asked. "What capsule?" He pressed the mechanical key harder against her cheek. "The sample you removed from Nico. If you knew where I hid things, you would not need me." The man struck the metal wall beside her head, hoping the noise would frighten her. Isabella did not flinch. She had spent half her life beside bodies left by violent men. Rage was rarely as controlled as it wanted to appear. The van turned sharply, then descended for 11 seconds. Isabella counted 2 speed bumps before it stopped. Wherever they had taken her was below street level, and large enough for a commercial vehicle. At the Romano estate, Dante stood alone in his brother's room. Nico's watch remained on the nightstand beside an unfinished glass of water. Dante had spent years believing control could protect everyone under his name. Nico's death had shown him control was an illusion. Isabella's escape appeared to prove that trust was another. Yet her final warning would not leave him, the traitor standing beside you. Matteo entered without knocking. "The captains are demanding a succession vote. My brother has been dead less than 2 days. They believe you authorized the terminal transfer. Until we recover the original document, they need assurance that you still control Romano Atlantic. The emergency vote would take place at Nico's public memorial in 48 hours. Canceling it would allow the captains to fracture into private alliances, and whoever controlled the falsified transfer order would seize the shipping terminals during the confusion." "Find Isabella," Dante said. "We are searching every Bellaforte property. Search ours first." Matteo's face remained neutral. "You believe she is still inside our territory?" "I believe no one crossed the cemetery wall during the blackout." Dante returned to Moretti Funeral Home before dawn. Without Isabella, the building had lost its discipline. Carlo Bianchi's viewing had been delayed because an assistant had applied the wrong cosmetic mixture. 2 transport permits carried incomplete identification numbers. Nico's remains had been returned to the Romano crypt, but no one could explain the altered tissue or the second chest incision. Dante entered Isabella's office. The drawer beneath her desk was open. A broken strand of black thread lay across the floor. Inside, he found old handwritten ledgers dating back 11 years. Every release entry followed the same exact pattern: full name, identification number, time received, time released, destination, vehicle plate, and 2 witness initials. Isabella even recorded the temperature of the transport compartment. The entry claiming she had released Nico to the Bellafortes contained only his name, the time, and her signature. It looked like her handwriting, but it did not contain her habits. That was the first contradiction. Dante took the ledger to Rosa Moretti, Isabella's 70-year-old aunt, who managed the funeral home's accounts. Rosa did not bow to him or offer coffee. "You put my niece in a grave," she said. "She transported my brother to an enemy warehouse. She transported 12 Bellaforte bodies last year, and 19 of yours. The dead do not inherit the arguments of the living. Did Isabella have access to an account receiving $2 million? Rosa opened a steel cabinet and produced the original bank agreement. The account bearing Isabella's name was an escrow fund, used to pay cemetery taxes for indigent families. Withdrawals required Isabella's signature and Rosa's physical key. The $2 million had appeared electronically, but had never been withdrawn. Someone had chosen an account linked to Isabella without understanding how it functioned. Dante examined the death certificate next. The county's live database showed Nico's identification number issued at 12:05 Wednesday morning, exactly as Matteo had reported. But Isabella had taught Dante that official records were not the same as original records. He called a county clerk whose son worked for Romano Atlantic. The clerk retrieved an automatically printed registration sheet from a machine isolated from the public network. Nico's number had been generated at 6:03 Wednesday morning. Isabella had been locked inside Dante's estate at that time. 4 guards confirmed that she had possessed no phone, computer, seal, or outside contact. The digital record had been moved backward by 6 hours. That was the second contradiction. Dante's certainty collapsed, slowly, which made it more painful. He remembered Isabella standing in the mud, asking him to read the time he had read it, and still chosen the shovel. He needed one final test. At noon, Dante summoned Matteo and dismissed everyone else from his office. Isabella hid a second tissue sample inside the crematorium's Western ash processor. He said, "Send no one. I want her to believe it remains undiscovered." Matteo agreed. Dante had invented the location. 9 minutes later, a security camera outside the crematorium recorded 2 men entering through the Western service door. Both used credentials issued by Vescari Security. They went directly to the ash processor. That was the third contradiction. Dante searched the cemetery's backup power records. During the blackout, a refrigerated maintenance van had departed through a tunnel beneath the mausoleum. Its GPS unit had been disabled, but its commercial toll transponder automatically registered 23 minutes later on a private road near an abandoned medical training center owned by a Vescari shell company. Matteo entered the security room behind him. "You should have told me you were investigating," he said. Dante closed the location map before Matteo could see it. "I was investigating Isabella." "And?" Dante forced the same coldness into his face that he had worn beside her grave. "She is guilty." Matteo relaxed by less than an inch. It was enough. Dante left the estate alone through a passage only Nico had known about. He carried no Romano phone and told no captain where he was going. For the first time since inheriting the family, Dante stepped outside his own security system and went to find the woman he had ordered buried. The abandoned medical training center had once belonged to a mortuary college. Isabella recognized the building's original purpose from the equipment in the basement: sloped tile floors, overhead ventilation ducts, stainless steel tables, and an industrial lift large enough to move bodies between levels. Whoever bought the property had removed the school's name but preserved everything useful for handling the dead. Her captors strapped her to a bariatric embalming table and cut away the wet sleeve covering her injured shoulder. A clear tube ran from an injection machine to a sealed blue container. Lazarus A7. The masked man placed her mechanical key beside the machine. "Tell us where you hid the sample." "You already opened the drawer. It was empty." Isabella concealed her relief. Someone had removed the original capsule before her captors reached it, or the false panel had defeated them. The man adjusted the injection pressure. "If this enters your artery, the medical examiner will identify heart failure, followed by an unauthorized embalming attempt. A grieving mortician destroyed by guilt. The concentration is wrong." His hand stopped. "Lazarus A7 separates below 58 degrees, she said. "Your basement is too cold. The tissue damage will expose the injection." He glanced at the container's temperature indicator. That hesitation gave Isabella what she needed. While he checked the chemical, she pressed her left heel against the table's hydraulic pedal. The head section rose abruptly, throwing the instrument tray into his back. Metal tools crashed across the floor. Isabella twisted toward the edge. Pain tore through her right shoulder, but she forced her bound wrists beneath the table rail and caught a fallen suture knife between 2 fingers. The masked man recovered and reached for her throat. She cut one restraint, seized the injection tube, and drove its metal coupling into the side of his knee. He collapsed. Isabella rolled off the table, landed hard, and used her weight to pin his weapon arm against the floor. She did not reach for his gun. Instead, she looped the restraint around his wrist and locked it to the table frame. Killing was not part of her profession. She refused to let violent men redefine what her hands were for. The basement door opened. Dante entered with a pistol raised. Isabella snatched a stainless steel trocar from the floor and pointed it at his chest. He stopped immediately. Behind him, one guard lay unconscious in the corridor. Dante's coat was torn at the shoulder, and blood darkened the cuff of his shirt, but his weapon remained steady. "I came alone," he said. "You came with 12 captains when you put me in the grave. I was wrong. That is not the same as being safe." "No." Dante slowly lowered his pistol. "It isn't he." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her. He did not ask for trust, forgiveness, or gratitude. He looked at the restraints hanging from her wrists, and then at the man she had secured without his help. "Can you move your right arm enough? May I examine it?" "No." Dante accepted that too. A muffled impact sounded behind the adjoining wall. Isabella found a second room locked from the outside. Dr. Aaron Pike lay inside, drugged but alive, with bruising around his wrists. The kidnappers had removed him from the Bellaforte warehouse through a loading passage before the Romano vehicles arrived, then used his disappearance to make him appear bought. Dante checked Pike's breathing. "Can he travel if we keep his airway open and do not let him walk?" A stack of shipping manifests covered a nearby desk. Isabella searched them while Dante lifted Pike onto a wheeled training table. The documents listed shipments of Lazarus A7 purchased through 3 medical supply companies. All 3 companies shared a mailing service with the Vescari Shell Corporation that owned the building. The preservative orders were disguised inside refrigerated cargo transfers, passing through Romano Atlantic's southern terminals. Isabella compared the numbers to those she had seen beneath ultraviolet light. They matched the first routing sequence from Nico's surgical mesh. Dante looked at her. "What was inside him?" "I don't know yet. Something thin and rectangular pressed those numbers into the tissue. Possibly a ceramic ledger key or an encrypted banking wafer." Nico knew someone searched electronic devices, so he hid the record where ordinary security would never look. Inside his own body, he had old surgical mesh beneath the sternum. He reopened the scar before he died. Dante's face tightened at the thought of his brother performing the desperate act alone. Isabella continued through the manifests. Each cargo transfer redirected a small percentage of Romano Atlantic's insurance reserves into a maritime escrow fund. The withdrawals were too small to threaten the company individually, but together they formed enough collateral to purchase controlling rights in 3 terminals if Dante lost emergency authority. "The succession vote," she said. "That is the deadline." Dante nodded. "At Nico's memorial, the captains will decide whether I retain control of Romano Atlantic. The forged transfer order makes it appear that I secretly surrendered the terminals to the Bellafortes. If they remove you, who receives temporary control? Security operations pass to Matteo until the council elects a successor." The evidence pointed directly toward Matteo's network, but not yet to the person who had ordered Nico's death. Corporate records could be fabricated. Shell companies could be created in another man's name. They still needed the missing object and proof that Matteo knowingly acted on the scheme. A siren sounded through the basement. The masked captive laughed from the floor. "You took too long." Smoke entered through the ventilation grills. The kidnappers had triggered the building's fire system, but no sprinklers activated. The doors upstairs locked automatically, converting the basement into an incinerator. Dante tried the stairwell. A magnetic barrier sealed it. "The body lift," Isabella said. "It only reaches the loading bay. That is where the refrigerated van entered. The van is gone. The drainage ramp isn't T." She positioned Pike on the lift and activated the old mechanical controls. Dante stepped in behind her. "You first," he said. "My plan, my order. Hold Pike's head level." Dante obeyed. The lift rose through thickening smoke and opened into a burning loading bay. Flames blocked the vehicle ramp, but Isabella found the emergency refrigerant valve behind a steel panel. Releasing it would create a dense, oxygen-poor vapor over the floor, enough to suppress the flames for seconds, not minutes. She explained the timing once. Dante removed his coat, wrapped it around Pike, and waited for her signal. He did not challenge her judgment or replace her plan with his own. Isabella turned the valve. White vapor exploded across the ramp. They pushed Pike through the opening as burning panels collapsed behind them. Jaunt took the heavier side of the table without touching Isabella's injured arm. Together they reached the road before the basement windows burst. Pike began to regain consciousness beneath the cold night air. His first coherent words were, "Lucia kept the envelope." The duplicate tissue slide still existed. Dante looked toward Isabella. "Matteo believes I still want you dead. That is the only advantage we have. You want me to return to the memorial as bait. No, I'm asking you to decide how we use the evidence." For the first time, Dante Romano placed the fate of his empire in someone else's hands. Isabella studied, the flames consuming the place prepared for her death. Then she faced him. "We let Matteo believe the grave succeeded," she said, "and this time you follow my plan." Isabella chose a closed Belfort chapel as their refuge. Lucia met them behind its boarded doors with 4 loyal guards and an emergency physician. Dr. Pike had inhaled smoke and suffered a mild concussion, but his condition was stable. Isabella's shoulder was deeply bruised, and the physician secured it in a supportive sling. She could use her hand, but lifting the arm would risk tearing the damaged muscle. Dante's cut required 6 stitches. He sat without complaint while the physician worked. Isabella watched from across the chapel, still wearing the black dress stained by rain, soil, and smoke. Dante had followed her out of the fire, but following one order did not erase the order that had put her in a grave. Lucia placed a sealed specimen envelope on the altar. "I kept it on me," she said. "Pike never touched this copy after Isabella gave it to me." Inside was the duplicate tissue slide bearing the residue from Nico's surgical mesh. Pike confirmed his initials on the seal and dictated a statement describing when and where the sample had been examined. Lucia's warehouse cameras, stored on an isolated local drive, showed the entire procedure. They now possessed evidence that could survive scrutiny. The tissue damage caused by Lazarus, A7, proved the official account of Nico's death was incomplete. The preserved residue and routing number fragments connected his hidden investigation to Romano Atlantic. That was suspicion, not conviction. The supply manifests, shell company registrations, cemetery inventory, toll record, and false county timestamp connected Vescari security to the equipment, locations, and altered systems used in the crime that proved access. But Matteo could still claim employees had abused his company without his knowledge. "What are we missing?" Dante asked. "Intent," Isabella said. "We can prove how Nico died and how I was framed. We cannot yet prove who ordered either act. And the original record Nico carried is still gone," Lucia added. Dante stood beside the chapel's darkened window. "The vote begins tomorrow at 3. "Cancel it," Pike said. "If I cancel, the Romano Atlantic Emergency Charter activates automatically at midnight. Operational control transfers to the security trustee until the captains elect a replacement." "Matteo," Isabella said. "He wrote the emergency provision 5 years ago after an attack shut down our board meeting. The conspiracy had not begun with Nico's death. Matteo had built the mechanism years earlier and waited for a crisis he could control. The memorial and vote had to proceed. Every captain, corporate director, shipping insurer, and terminal representative would gather in Romano Atlantic's central atrium. Matteo controlled the guest credentials, vehicle screening, elevators, and emergency exits. He had designed the building's security network himself. Entering openly would place Isabella back in his hands. Staying away would surrender the terminals. "We use the memorial because Matteo needs it," she said. "He cannot seize control privately. The insurers and captains must witness your removal." Dante turned from the window. "What do you need?" Isabella did not miss the change in his language. He did not tell her what he would provide, he asked. "First, Matteo must continue believing. I escaped with the Bellaforts and died in the training center fire. Second, he must believe the evidence from Nico's body was destroyed. Third, we give him one piece of information that only the person directing the conspiracy would need to act upon. Lucia smiled faintly. A poisoned secret, a controlled one. They constructed the trap around a ceramic rectangle from an identification printer in Lucia's warehouse. It matched the pressure mark found in Nico's surgical mesh, but contained no usable financial data. Isabella coated its edge with colorless preservation wax mixed with a fluorescent tracing powder. Under ordinary light, it appeared untouched. Under the ultraviolet lamps used in funeral preparation, anyone who handled it would carry the marker for at least 12 hours. The false wafer went inside a hollow silver rosary bead placed with Nico's body. Only Dante and Isabella knew it was false. Dante returned to the estate shortly before dawn. He entered through the front gates with ash on his coat and told Matteo that the medical training center had burned before he reached Isabella. Was her body recovered? Matteo asked. No. Then she may still be alive. If she survived, she has nothing. Pike is dead. The Belafort evidence was destroyed, and Nico's sample burned with the building. Dante allowed several seconds of silence before adding the bait. One of Lucia's guards talked before he died. Isabella hid Nico's original ceramic ledger key inside the silver rosary. For tomorrow's memorial, she planned to recover it from the casket during the viewing. Matteo's expression did not change. Then I'll increase security around the body. No one touches Nico except family, Dante said. That includes you. The restriction forced Matteo into a choice. If he ignored the wafer, it might be exposed during the vote. If he sent someone to steal it, he would confirm knowledge of an object that had never appeared in any official report. Back at the chapel, Isabella prepared their fallback. She photographed the tissue slide through Pike's microscope using instant film, then sealed copies of the laboratory statement. Supplier records, offline county registration sheet, and warehouse images into 3 separate packets. Lucia's guards would deliver them by hand to 3 captains with no connection to Vescari security. If the building network failed, the evidence would still exist. If Isabella disappeared again, the packets would be opened at 3:15. Dante called through a disposable phone at noon. He took the bait, he said. A maintenance worker assigned by Matteo had requested emergency access to the memorial preparation room. The request claimed that Nico's casket contained a defective electronic seal, even though the casket had no electronic components. Do not stop him, Isabella said. There is another problem. Matteo changed the memorial's security plan. Every exit will lock when the vote begins, and all guests will be searched, twice. He expects an attack. He expects you. Isabella looked down at her sling. She could not fight her way through Matteo's men, and she refused to send Lucia's guards into a battle inside a crowded memorial. She studied the old architectural plans Rosa Moretti had provided for the Romano Atlantic atrium. The building had been constructed over a 19th-century freight terminal. Its modern security system covered every public entrance, but a sealed hydraulic platforms still connected the basement loading tunnel to the central stage. It had once been used to raise ceremonial cargo during company anniversaries. No camera monitored its mechanical control room because the lift was listed as permanently decommissioned. Let him lock every door, Isabella said. I want to use one that evening. Dante met her beneath the old freight terminal. He carried the access key, but when they reached the lift controls, he placed it in Isabella's hand. If this fails, he said, the captains will remove me. If it fails, Matteo will kill us before they finish voting. Dante held her gaze. Then the final decision is yours. Isabella turned the key. High above them, the memorial doors opened, and Matteo welcomed the Romano captains into his trap. At 3 o'clock, Nico Romano's casket rested beneath the glass ceiling of the Romano Atlantic atrium. Nearly 200 mourners filled the marble floor. The front rows held family members and captains. Behind them sat corporate directors, terminal managers, insurers, attorneys, and representatives from the unions whose contracts depended on Romano's stability. Black fabric covered the company emblems, but nothing could disguise that the memorial was also a transfer of power. Matteo stood beside the central security station, controlling every entrance. Dante entered alone. He approached Nico's open casket and placed one hand against its polished edge. The silver rosary lay between his brother's folded fingers. One bead contained Isabella's false ceramic wafer. Matteo watched him pray. Below the atrium, Isabella waited beside the freight lift controls. She had changed into a tailored black suit that accommodated her sling without concealing her full figure. Soil still darkened the edges of her shoes. She had refused Lucia's offer to replace them. "I want them to see where I came from," she had said. Her disposable phones displayed a silent feed from a pinhole camera hidden in Nico's floral arrangement. At 3:12, the maintenance worker entered the preparation room. He checked the corridor, opened the casket's lower access panel, and removed the rosary without disturbing Nico's hands. The camera captured his face and the time he carried the rosary into a service room where Matteo waited. Dante saw the same feed through a concealed screen inside his memorial folder. Matteo broke open the hollow bead, removed the ceramic wafer, and inserted it into a portable reader. The reader rejected it. Matteo stared at the false key for less than a second before crushing the device beneath his heel. He wiped the wafer clean, returned it to the bead, and sent the maintenance worker back toward the casket. "He knows," Isabella whispered. The controlled information had forced Matteo to act. But the trap had also revealed that Dante no longer believed her guilty. Matteo immediately changed the schedule. The memorial music stopped before the final hymn. Steel barriers descended over the public entrances, and security officers moved into predetermined positions around the atrium. Dante stepped toward the central podium. "The vote is scheduled after the service. The insurers have invoked the instability clause," Matteo announced. "They require immediate confirmation of operational authority." An attorney displayed a notice on the atrium screens. It claimed Romano Atlantic's insurance. Coverage would be suspended at 4:00 unless the captains appointed an emergency trustee. Without coverage, every ship and terminal would stop operating. The document bore authentic insurer credentials. Matteo had prepared his contingency before entering the building. Dante could not simply reject the vote. Thousands of legitimate employees would lose access to the docks, and 3 vessels already at sea would become uninsured before reaching port. The captains began arguing. Beneath them, Isabella turned the freight lift key. Nothing happened. A red maintenance light appeared on the control panel. "Remote hydraulic lock engaged." "He found the lift," she said. 2 armed security officers entered the basement tunnel behind her. Isabella pulled the emergency release, but Matteo had drained pressure from the upper hydraulic chamber. The platform could not rise. She backed toward the mechanical control room. Protecting her injured shoulder, one guard ordered her to kneel. She slammed the heavy control door between them and locked it manually, but the room offered no second exit. The guards began cutting through the hinges. Her phone signal vanished. Upstairs, Matteo placed the forged terminal transfer order on the podium. Dante Romano authorized the surrender of 3 terminals to the Bellaforte family. He told the assembly. When Nico discovered the betrayal, Dante's Mortician removed the evidence from his body and carried him into Bellaforte custody. Images filled the screens. Isabella transporting Nico, the bearer bonds inside her seal case, her apparent ledger entry, and the altered death certificate. Matteo had arranged the evidence in a sequence more persuasive than any single lie. Then another recording appeared. It showed Dante entering the abandoned medical center and leaving with Isabella alive. A murmur spread across the atrium. "You concealed a fugitive after publicly condemning her." Matteo said, "You lied to every captain in this room. That accusation was true." Dante looked at the faces surrounding him. Some showed anger, others fear. Matteo did not need them to believe every part of the conspiracy. He needed them to believe Dante's judgment had become unreliable. "Where is Isabella now?" Captain Salvatore Greco demanded. Matteo touched his earpiece. The atrium's central cargo platform began to rise. Isabella emerged under white memorial lights, with her wrists restrained and 2 guards beside her. One held a pistol against her back. The freight lift she had planned to use as her entrance had become the stage for her capture. Dante's control fractured for one visible instant. Matteo saw it. "Here is your traitor," he said. "Tell us, Dante, did she steal your brother's body or did she act on your orders?" Isabella met Dante's eyes. Their plan had depended on Matteo, believing Dante still rejected her. Now, the entire room demanded that Dante choose between her and his authority. He stepped away from the podium. "Isabella Moretti acted without my authorization," he said. Pain moved through her despite knowing what he was doing. Dante continued, his voice carrying across the locked atrium. "She removed Nico's body, entered the family crypt, contacted the Bellaforts, and concealed evidence from me. Every statement was true." Matteo's confidence returned. "Then you accept judgment against her?" Dante looked directly at Isabella. "She will receive no protection from my office." The captains heard rejection. Matteo heard surrender. Only Isabella recognized the calculated precision. Dante had described her actions without calling them betrayal, and he had denied protection from his office, not from himself. Still, the performance placed her life in Matteo's hands. The emergency ballot began. One by one, the captains inserted their black voting tokens into a brass box. Matteo needed 14 votes to become security trustee. The first count gave him 11. 2 frightened captains changed sides after the insurer's countdown reached 20 minutes. 13. Lucius' evidence packets were supposed to be opened at 3:15, but only one captain stood. His packet contained photographs of the tissue slide and the original county timestamp. Before he could speak, a security officer announced that the other 2 couriers had been detained outside with forged credentials. Matteo had intercepted 2 of the 3 fallbacks. Captain Greco examined the surviving documents, then shook his head. "This proves records were altered. It does not prove who altered them." He was right. Suspicion and access were not conviction. Matteo placed his own voting token into the box. 14. The atrium screens changed to display the emergency trusteeship contract. Once Dante signed his removal or the captain certified his refusal, Matteo would gain immediate control of Romano Atlantic. The transfer would release the stolen escrow reserves and make the terminal seizure nearly impossible to reverse. A security officer brought Dante the signature tablet. Across the stage, one guard pressed Isabella toward Nico's casket. The ultraviolet lamp used to illuminate the white funeral flowers cast a violet edge across Matteo's hands. Fluorescent residue blazed along his right thumb. He had handled the false wafer himself. Isabella turned toward Nico, searching for something more powerful than a trace Matteo could explain away. Her gaze moved over his restored face, the closed incision in his chest, and his carefully arranged hands. Then she noticed his teeth. Nico's emergency dental file had shown a porcelain crown on the upper left molar. During her first examination, the crown had reflected light like natural enamel. Now that same tooth appeared slightly darker. Someone had replaced it after death. The pressure mark in his surgical mesh had never identified where the ceramic ledger key remained. Nico had pressed it into the tissue to leave a backup, then hidden the original in the one place a mortician would inspect before burial, inside his dental crown. The countdown reached 5 minutes. Dante raised the signature tablet. Isabella looked at him and said, "Sign it." Matteo smiled, but Dante saw the change in her eyes and understood that the balance had just shifted. Dante signed the trusteeship agreement. A shocked murmur moved through the atrium as his authority transferred to Matteo. The signature did not complete the process. Matteo still had to accept responsibility using his personal security credential before the insurer's deadline. That was why Isabella had told Dante to sign. Matteo approached the tablet and pressed his right thumb against the biometric reader. The screen confirmed his identity, paired his credential with Romano Atlantic's central system, and granted him temporary control of the terminals. The stolen escrow reserves began transferring into his administrative account. Before this vote is certified, Isabella said, ask him why his hand is glowing. Matteo glanced at his thumb. Captain Greco moved the ultraviolet memorial lamp closer. Fluorescent powder burned bright across Matteo's skin and the cuff of his shirt. Isabella faced the captains. That marker existed only on a false ceramic wafer hidden inside Nico's rosary. Dante told one person where to find it. Matteo did not panic as security chief. I inspected an object believed to contain stolen corporate data. After Dante explicitly prohibited you from touching Nico's body, a prohibition he issued while secretly working with you. Neither of you has proven that the object was false. The maintenance room recording appeared on Dante's memorial screen. It showed Matteo opening the rosary, testing the wafer, and crushing the reader when the object failed. Matteo looked toward the captains. Evidence manufactured by two people attempting to preserve Dante's authority. His rebuttal was credible. The trap proved he had acted on secret information, but he could still claim he had been protecting the family. Isabella turned to Nico's casket. The false wafer was bait. The original never left Nico's body. Matteo's control slipped for the first time. One of his guards pushed Isabella back. Captain Greco intervened. She is the licensed mortician responsible for this body. Let her examine it. Matteo could refuse only by revealing fear of what she might find. He signaled the guard to release her restraints. Isabella opened the preparation compartment built beneath the casket. Rosa had stocked it according to Moretti protocol: gloves, restorative wax, forceps, cotton, and a compact dental instrument. Isabella pulled on one glove with her uninjured hand and leaned over Nico. She touched the darkened crown on his upper left molar. The original crown was porcelain fused to gold. This replacement is ceramic over a hollow core. With a controlled turn of the instrument, she loosened the crown. Inside it lay a black ceramic sliver no larger than a fingernail. Nico's ledger key. Isabella placed it into the reader, attached to the voting tablet. The device requested 2 independent credentials. Dante provided the Romano executive code. Matteo's thumbprint, entered moments earlier when he accepted the trusteeship, supplied the second. The ledger opened across every atrium screen. It contained 5 years of escrow diversions into the 3 Vescari shell companies, purchase orders for Lazarus A7, cemetery access logs, payments to the county database administrator, and the original insurance option that would transfer the terminals to an overseas syndicate once Matteo became trustee. Each record carried a hardware signature from the same security credential. Matteo had just authenticated publicly. Matteo recovered quickly. My credential was cloned. It could have been, Isabella said. That is why Nico preserved more than transactions. The ledger contained a sequence of maintenance checks tied to the Lazarus 7 containers. Each entry recorded chemical temperature, batch density, and the biometric pulse pattern of the person opening the crypt inventory cabinet. A copied password could be stolen. A security token could be duplicated. But the pulse pattern recorded during Matteo's acceptance of the trusteeship matched the crypt entries made before Nico's death. Dr. Pike's signed analysis appeared beside the records. The Lazarus A7 batch in Nico's tissue matched the container Matteo had opened. Independent chemical evidence and authenticated physical access met in the same timeline you injected him, Dante said. Matteo did not confess. He reached for the tablet and tried to erase the ledger. The server rejected him. Isabella had instructed Dante to accept trusteeship for one more reason. The moment Matteo authenticated his new authority, Romano Atlantic's compliance system created an immutable insurer archive outside the building. He had preserved the evidence himself by trying to seize control. The captains withdrew their voting tokens. Matteo touched his earpiece. Contain the atrium. 4 security officers raised their weapons. Steel partitions began descending from the ceiling, separating the captains from the stage. Matteo seized Isabella by her injured arm and dragged her against him. Dante moved forward. Another step, Matteo warned, and she dies before your brother is buried. Isabella's face tightened with pain, but she looked down at the stage beneath them. She had studied the old freight terminal plans. The casket stood directly above the hydraulic cargo platform. Her heel found the mechanical emergency pedal concealed beneath the black memorial drapery. She drove it downward. The center of the stage dropped 18 inches without warning. Matteo lost his footing and released her arm. Isabella rolled behind the casket as Dante struck Matteo's weapon aside. Captain Greco and 2 terminal managers pulled the nearest guards off balance before they could fire. The descending steel partitions stopped halfway. Lucia's 3rd courier had not carried evidence. He had carried Isabella's mechanical override instructions to the building's union engineer, who cut power to Matteo's locks the instant the escrow transfer began. Public exits opened. Matteo ran toward the private security elevator, but the biometric panel no longer recognized him. Accepting the trusteeship had linked his identity to the fraud archive, automatically suspending his credential once the insurer received Nico's ledger. He was trapped by the control system he had built. Dante's captains surrounded him. Matteo looked at Isabella with open hatred. He had accounted for Dante's grief, the captain's fear, and the vulnerability of every electronic record. He had not accounted for a mortician who understood that the dead could preserve evidence in tissue, teeth, chemicals, and scars. Dante stepped to the central microphone. Isabella Moretti did not betray this family. He said before the same captains who had watched her thrown into a grave. She protected my brother when I failed him. She protected this organization when I condemned her. Every accusation against her was false, and every order that harmed her was mine. No one spoke. Dante turned toward Isabella, but he did not ask her to stand beside him. He stepped away from the podium and surrendered the public stage to her. Isabella approached the microphone in her soil-stained shoes, her injured arm held against her body. My name was used to authenticate a lie, she said. You believed it, because the work I performed for you was invisible until someone corrupted it. From this moment forward, no body, record, or piece of evidence under my care will belong to any family's private authority, including the Romanos. She looked directly at Dante. And no man will ever decide my innocence in secret again. This time, Dante lowered his head before her. Matteo Vescari was removed from the atrium in restraints designed by his own security company. The insurer archive placed the financial crimes under federal jurisdiction because the stolen reserves had crossed state and international banking systems. Dr. Pike's testimony, the Lazarus A7 analysis, the county's original registration sheet, and Nico's ceramic ledger established an unbroken chain from Matteo's shell companies to the murder and attempted terminal seizure. He never confessed. He did not need to. 3 Vescari officers accepted immunity in exchange for identifying the men who had injected Nico, abducted Isabella, and destroyed the medical training center. The county administrator who altered the death record surrendered the original payment instructions. Romano Atlantic recovered the escrow reserves before they cleared the offshore account, though 2 terminals remained closed for weeks during the audit. Consequences reached beyond Matteo. Dante removed every captain who had approved Isabella's burial without independent review. The guards who had thrown her into the grave were dismissed and placed before the family council. Moretti Funeral Home received a formal public correction from Romano Atlantic, the county registrar, and the insurers. Every false document bearing Isabella's name was displayed beside the evidence proving it forged. 1 week later, Dante returned to the atrium. The same captains, directors, employees, and terminal representatives who had witnessed Isabella's humiliation stood before him again. Isabella waited near the front in a deep red suit tailored around her soft, full figure. Her shoulder remained supported beneath the jacket, but she stood without assistance. Dante stepped to the microphone. "I believed evidence designed to exploit my grief and my faith in my own authority," he said. "That explains my failure. It does not excuse it." He looked directly at Isabella. "I rejected your warning, condemned you publicly, and ordered an act that could have killed you. You owed me no loyalty, yet you protected my brother's truth and the people who depended on this company. I am sorry. I do not ask you to forgive me." He placed a signed document on the podium. It transferred Romano Atlantic's death records, medical evidence storage, and chain of custody oversight to an independent forensic trust. Isabella would control its professional standards. But the trust would not belong to Dante, the Romanos, or any rival family. Funding came from the recovery of the assets Matteo had stolen. Isabella read every page before signing. Then she added one condition. If any Romano attempts to interfere with an examination, the entire record goes automatically to independent counsel. Dante nodded. "Agreed. And you do not receive a private copy." "Agreed." Only then did she sign. Isabella did not return to Dante's estate. She spent 4 months rebuilding Moretti Funeral Home, establishing the new trust, and hiring professionals whose employment did not depend on mafia approval. Dante called her twice during that time. Both conversations concerned the investigation, and he never used business as an excuse to remain on the line. He repaired what he could without demanding access to the woman he had harmed. On the first clear morning of spring, Isabella visited Nico's grave alone. Fresh grass covered the ground where she had nearly been buried. Dante arrived but stopped several feet away. "I can leave," he said. "You can stay." He stood beside her, not in front of her, not above her. After a quiet moment, Dante offered her a small envelope. It contained no contract, jewelry, or claim of ownership. Inside were 2 tickets to a public concert Isabella had mentioned years earlier. "Dinner first?" he asked. "If the answer is no, nothing changes." Isabella studied the man who had once assumed power, gave him the right to decide her fate. He no longer reached for her without permission. He no longer mistook obedience for loyalty or possession for love. "One dinner," she said. "No guards at the table." A restrained smile softened his face. "Your terms." "My terms will always matter." "They will." Isabella slipped her uninjured hand into his, not because he had rescued her, restored her reputation, or finally recognized her beauty. She chose him because he had learned to stand beside her while leaving her free to walk away. Together they left the cemetery. Behind them, the grave remained closed. Ahead of them, nothing was promised except an equal first step.